All right, so let's just cut straight to the chase. Errol, the Truth, Spence Jr. is still a problem. I think he's still the king of the welterweight division right now. And he showed up and he showed out. And this man has been out of the ring for, I think, 14 months. And you saw a little bit of the rust, but, you know, styles make fights. And in boxing, the best must always fight the best, because that is the barometer by which we measure a fighter's greatness. It's one thing for us to see you in the gym or see you against lesser opponents that, you know, aren't going to push you. But when you are in the ring against the best competition, the best will always bring out the best in you, the fighter. And man, we saw it was such a beautiful fight on Saturday night. Shout out to Yordenis Ugas, Cuban champion, a champion at heart, a champion in the ring, just a champion. He has a beautiful story, and he's really fought through a lot. And Yordenis Ugas has been the kind of fighter that he seizes the moment, right? He's been robbed on more than one occasion in his career, but he fought back. And in his professional career, right, he had a very close fight with Shawn Porter that a lot of people thought that Yordenis Ugas actually won. And he did beat Manny Pacquiao last year in August in the fight that was supposed to be Errol Spence's fight. Errol Spence was supposed to fight Manny Pacquiao last August, and because he suffered an injury, a detached retina in his eye, he had to go into immediate surgery. And that fight, which was going to be the biggest fight in the sport of boxing last year, the Spence-Pacquiao fight did not happen. But Yordenis Ugas stepped in to replace Errol Spence and seizing a moment. He beat the legend Manny Pacquiao, and Pacquiao's probably going to retire now. He doesn't have a belt, and he's coming off of a loss. So we don't know what happened, but we know that Yordenis Ugas took the belt from Pacquiao. And so, that being said, the fight was finally made for Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas. And I think what a lot of people thought was going to happen did end up happening, but it happened in just such dramatic and beautiful fashion. It was so good for the sport of boxing. If you didn't see it, go back and watch highlights. It was just such a beautiful fight. Shout out to my guy Omar. This dude Omar predicted this fight exactly. He said, I predict a TKO stoppage due to a cut between the 9th and 11th round. He should have put money on that prediction, because that's exactly what ended up happening. Errol Spence stops Yordenis Ugas. The doctor stopped the fight in round 10 because Ugas could not see out of his right eye. And just to summarize the fight, the first, 5-6 rounds, it was a chess match. It was exactly what we thought it was going to be. Errol Spence, who normally walks through opponents, we knew he wasn't just going to walk through Ugas early in the fight. Ugas is a pure boxer with a tight, airtight defense and a good jab. If you're going to fight Errol Spence, you need to be on your P's and Q's. What do I mean by that? You need to have your fundamentals down. You can't have holes in your game, especially in your defense, because he's going to test every single part of your defense, he being Errol Spence. So in the first half of the fight, we see a lot of back and forth. It's a chess match, right? And so Yordenis Ugas, I believe, won a few of those first few early rounds because of his jab. he was keeping Errol Spence at bay with the jab and the jab to the body. Yordenis Ugas has long arms, tight defense. So as long as he's keeping his range, I'm like, man, I don't know how Spence is going to get in. And you see Spence getting frustrated in the first few rounds. He looked jittery. He's throwing a lot of wide looping shots. Looks like he's trying to hurt Ugas early on. And that's dangerous because anyone who knows boxing will tell you the fastest way to get knocked out is trying to knock somebody else out, because you thinking offensively often leads to lapses in your defense and poor judgment. And a lot of times there are fighters who get hurt trying to hurt another fighter rather than just sticking to the game plan. And experienced people will let you know, you stick to the game plan, let the knockout come to you. Don't go looking for it, because you go looking for a knockout, you're going to get knocked out. And I was worried about that for Errol Spence. And I saw little hints of that in the first few rounds. You see Errol Spence just looks like he's looking to hurt Ugas in the first few rounds. And he ends up throwing these wide looping shots, he's falling off balance. He's lunging forward with his punches, getting out of position. And Ugas, who's a disciplined Cuban fighter, is catching Spence in between shots. He's catching Spence with a lot of counter shots. Errol Spence, every time he throws one, Ugas is coming back with 2 or 3. Another thing Ugas was doing was he was testing Errol Spence to the body with the jab to the body and with other combinations, hooks and uppercuts to the body. That was a good game plan, because one thing that we know is that body punchers don't like body punches. That's why they're body punchers. Body punches hurt. That's why you throw them, because you know how much they hurt. If you ever look at Triple G, Canelo, Errol Spence, they don't respond well to body shots. Any of those fighters, but they're all phenomenal body punchers, right? And so Ugas is here testing Errol Spence to the body. And so he's touching Errol Spence with the jab to the body, like I said, with hooks to the body and whatnot. And it's having an effect on Errol Spence. Spence ends up taking steps back. You see Spence leaning over every time Ugas goes to the body. And I know I was thinking the same thing that everybody else was thinking, which was, man, we seen Terrence Crawford knock dudes out with body shots. We don't like the way Errol Spence is responding to these body shots, to these punches. So Ugas is testing Errol Spence to the body. He's also touching him with the jab. They're going back and forth with their jab. Errol Spence with his right-handed jab from the southpaw position, and Ugas with the left jab from the orthodox position. And they're battling for position in the ring, and they're going back and forth with the jab. Spence, although he is the aggressor in the first few rounds, clearly, Ugas is catching his punches on the glove, on the forearm, on the shoulders, on the elbows. And so Spence's punches in the first few rounds were not getting through clearly. As a matter of fact, I think in the first few rounds, Ugas was actually landing clearer shots than Errol Spence. Spence was the aggressor, but I think Ugas was landing clearer shots. And a lot of those clearer shots that Ugas was landing were being landed in between Spence's shots. So Errol Spence, he'll throw, a jab cross, except, it wasn't really a jab cross. He's throwing a right jab with a left hook coming from a southpaw stance. So he's throwing a left hook from here, trying to get around Ugas's guard or trying to punch through the guard. Well, everybody knows that straight punches, right? The quickest way to get between two distances is in a straight line, right? If you want to get from point A to point B, the fastest way to get there is in a straight line. So while Errol Spence is throwing looping shots trying to go around, Ugas is throwing straight punches, and he's getting through the guard. He's catching Spence in between shots, like I said. And so shout out to Errol Spence's chin in this fight. We saw his chin tested on a couple of occasions, and to be honest, we've seen Errol Spence's chin tested in a lot of fights now. And I don't know how, beneficial that's going to be to him in the long run. But in the short term, it's a beautiful thing to see. It's a testament to his stamina his preparation and how in shape he is, because he takes punches extremely well. And then you can see the warrior and the dog come out of Errol Spence, because when Spence gets tagged, a lot of times he'll smile, he'll wipe the beard, and that's his way of saying, yo, I got a granite chin. You know, you're more likely to break your hand than to break me, right? And so Spence, when he gets tagged on the chin, his competitor comes out, the dog in him comes out, and he usually likes to go after fighters. Same thing happened in this fight, right? And so, like I said, first few rounds, very close. You could have scored it either way. I think Spence edged out the first few rounds because of his aggression in ring generalship, right? But again, Ugas is catching these punches on the glove. He's catching them on the elbow. He's catching them on the shoulder, right? And it doesn't look like Spence's punches are starting to take effect. But to anyone watching really closely, you see Ugas's right eye is starting to close up. So hold up, why is his right eye starting to close up? It's looking like he's catching these punches. What happened is that throughout those rounds, Errol Spence begins to find minor holes in Ugas's guard. Minor holes, very, very minor, very subtle. But Spence was able to pick up on it. What do I mean by that? Ugas normally fights in a high guard defense, right? He doesn't really roll a lot of shots. He likes to catch them on his gloves, at least in this fight, right? And so what Spence starts doing, because Ugas's high guard, his high guard was more front facing. So it wasn't as much earmuffs as much as it was on his eyebrows and temples, right? So Spence starts punching through the gloves, right? In other words, he's making Ugas hit himself, right? So Ugas' hand is here, but Spence is punching through the hand. And so all that, a lot of y'all don't know that even when you in the high guard, when you face somebody that knows how to punch, that concussive force from those punches, you're going to feel that. It feels just like you get hit. A lot of times, like, people don't know, and your opponent doesn't always know either. It takes experience and instinct to know to keep going at it, though. But that being said, when you are in a tight defense and your opponent has power and they're punching against your defense, a lot of times you can still feel that concussive force in your head, and it still feels like you're getting punched in the face. A lot of times you'll catch punches on the glove, and sometimes you'll be like, yo, did they just hit me? Right? Because the force that comes through it. So that being said, Spence is testing Ugas' guard, and this isn't the first time we've seen Errol Spence do this, because he did this in the Lamont Peterson fight where he's punching through the guard. And so that's one part of it, literally punching through Ugas' forearms and hands, which I think added to the swelling in his eye. The next thing that Spence was also doing was Spence began to contort his punches to sneak through the guard, not just penetrate through his hands and forearms, but to go in between Ugas' hands. So Ugas would have both his hands up, and Spence, as he was throwing his left uppercut from the southpaw stance, he began to turn it on a few occasions to sneak it through. And then that was one way that Spence snuck through the guard. But the next way was he will go around the guard. Ugas' high guard was front facing to catch those front punches coming from Errol Spence. So what Spence began to do, which this was his strategy in the beginning, but I didn't like it in the beginning. I think this is a better second half strategy. Show him something different in the beginning and then switch it up. But Spence's left hook that he was looping around began to land. His left hook and his right hook began to land. And he's starting to land these shots behind Ugas' glove. So again, Ugas' defense is front facing on his temple, but you would see Spence coming around the back of Ugas' guard, landing a lot of shots on the ear and on the back of the jaw. And those shots take their toll on you over time. And so, yes, in the first half of the fight, you start very subtly seeing that Ugas' right eye is beginning to close, and that's due to the left uppercuts, the straight left hands through Ugas' guard, and the left hooks coming around the back of Ugas's guard. The other thing that Ugas needed to do was keep the fight at a distance. He definitely, and everyone knows this, he made a huge mistake letting Errol Spence fight in the pocket. Spence is a phenomenal inside fighter. He loves to fight in the pocket. Fighting Errol Spence in the pocket, that means in close, in a telephone booth, shoulder to shoulder, chest to chest. You're not beating Errol Spence in a phone booth. You're going to have to fight him at distance. You have a good jab. You're a pure boxer with a tight defense. At a distance, you got to keep Errol Spence at a distance. And I think Ugas made that mistake. Now, also, in the middle of the fight, fifth or sixth round, can't remember, Errol Spence loses his mouthpiece, right? Ugas sort of slaps him. Errol Spence's mouthpiece goes flying. To his credit, he took responsibility for that. And he took responsibility for the fact that he went looking for his mouthpiece after he got smacked out. Everyone knows, you wait for the ref to break the action. But if you lose your mouthpiece, you just get ready to fight. Bite down and just get ready to fight without it. But the rule is the referee has to wait until there's a lull in the action before he calls a timeout to help you go get your mouthpiece. But you got to be ready to fight without it. Errol took his eyes off of Ugas, off the fight. He thought he heard the ref say stop. Errol went to go look for the mouthpiece, and Ugas hit him with the Floyd Mayweather Victor Ortiz. He just hit him with a quick 1-2, two-piece and a biscuit. Errol Spence stumbles into the ropes. His legs wobble a little bit. I believe it hurt him. He recovered very fast, but that was a turning point in the fight, because since Ugas hit Spence so clearly, and it clearly hurt him, the dog came out of Errol Spence. And from that point forward, the fight was never the same. And I mean, from that point forward, you saw a lot of things come out of Errol Spence. One of those things being his stamina and work ethic in the gym. Yo, you really saw it put on full display from the sixth round on, because it was in the sixth round that his mouthpiece got knocked out. And like I said, you saw the dog come out of Errol Spence. What do I mean when I say you see the dog come out of him? There's certain people that when their back is against the wall, they don't shrink, but they live for those moments, right? And you see Ugas, he cracks Errol Spence with the 1-2. Spence falls against the ropes, and you do see Spence get hurt, and you see his legs get buckled, but Spence's response was to run straight at Ugas and keep fighting him in the pocket. Now, all boxers at some point, get hurt in the ring, but it's about how you respond to it. You can tell a lot about a fighter's work ethic and stamina by how they respond when they're hurt. For example, Andre Ward, legendary champion, 2-division champion, the United States' last gold medalist in men's boxing. He's USA Boxing's last gold medalist, I believe, in the 2004 Games. Hall of Famer, legendary fighter. We saw Andre Ward on a couple of occasions in his career get hurt, and you saw him recover from it. You can see the time that he put in the gym come into play, where he's not completely off balance. He fights back and beats Kovalev, and then he knocks out Kovalev in the rematch, right? Timothy Desert Storm Bradley, known for getting in incredible condition for his fights. You think about his fight with Ruslan Provodnikov. That was just a career-defining fight for him. Bradley gets hurt, and then in like the 11th, 12th round, Bradley is basically out on his feet. The rope's holding him up, and he's just throwing punches. Just, you can see the training come out of him in those moments. And you saw that happen with Errol Spence, where Ugas cracked him, and Spence gathers himself And a few moments later, you can't even tell that Spence was hurt because he's now firing back at Ugas with everything he has, right? And he's hurting Ugas in this moment, hitting him with hard shots. And I think that really discouraged Yordenis Ugas, because what happens when you hit your opponent with everything you have and they keep coming forward? What happens when you hurt them and they don't take a step back? They keep coming forward, and that's exactly what we saw Errol Spence do. And in the second half of that fight, really from that moment on, Errol Spence took over. And one, we were able to see his stamina on display by how he responded to being hurt. But we also saw his stamina on display because he did not take a step back in that fight. He was the aggressor for 10 straight rounds, and it looked like he could have done it for another 10 rounds. He let his hands go. One thing you will never be able to say about Errol Spence Jr. is that he doesn't let his hands go, because he was letting his hands go this entire fight. He was literally putting everything on Yordenis Ugas. And in the second half of the fight, Spence, we really saw him just break this grown man down. Ugas stopped throwing punches after round 6. He stopped fighting at a distance. And I think it was clear that the body shots, the mental pressure. What do I mean when I say mental pressure? You hit a fighter with everything you have and they keep coming forward. That's mental pressure. That's mental pressure, because you begin to create a conversation in the mind of your opponent, which is, dang, I hit him with everything I have and he's still coming. What do I have to put on this dude to get him off me? What do I need to do to create some breathing room for myself? And so that's mental pressure. When you start creating the conversation in your opponent's head where they can't solve you, they can't solve the puzzle, they can't seem to get over the fact that you're going to keep coming forward, right? So he put mental pressure on Ugas. I believe that had a major effect. The next thing was the physical pressure he was putting on Ugas. Body shots, punching through the guard, hitting them on the arms, hitting them on the forearms, the elbows, hitting through his gloves, causing that concussive force on Ugas's head. And so I believe the physical pressure took its toll. And lastly, I think it was that eye. I think Ugas is starting to lose vision in his right eye. Yeah. Is it his right eye? Yeah, he's beginning to lose vision in his right eye. Errol Spence is putting mental and physical pressure on him. And he realizes that his punches aren't really having any effect on Errol Spence. And so really from the 6th round on, Ugas, he looked like a shell of the fighter that he was in rounds 1 through 6, man. He's keeping his gun in the holster. He's not letting his hands go. He's just standing a high guard. And Errol Spence proceeds to beat him down through the guard. And round after round after round, Errol is letting it on him. And sure enough, in the 8th round, the doctor checks Ugas' eye because it's starting to close. Ugas can't really see, but he convinced the doctor that he can. Doc lets him fight on for, another round and a half, 2 rounds. Come the 10th round, Errol's putting that heat on him again. There's a lull in the action. Referee stops the action, takes Ugas over to the doctor. The doctor calls it. To Yordenis Ugas' credit, he did not want to stop. He wanted to keep fighting. And, he's a dog, man. He's a true warrior. He did not want to quit. Even with one eye, he wanted to keep fighting. And I believe that that's who he is, man. I believe he's truly a fighter. Credit to him. But this was a statement victory for Errol Spence Jr. This has us as fans licking our chops, because not only did he stop Yordenis Ugas after the fight, he did what he gave the people what they wanted to see. he called out Terrence Crawford, called him out like a thug too. He said, yo, I'm coming for your belt too. And yo, we licking our chops right now. As fans, we licking our chops right now because we know what's next. Ain't gonna be no fights in between. Terrence Crawford don't want no fights in between. If you know Errol Spence, you know he not looking for no tune-up, no in-between fight. The next fight that you can expect as a boxing fan is the biggest fight since Canelo Alvarez versus Triple G and Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. This fight is going to unite the boxing world. I mean, it's going to divide us, you know what I mean? Like, as people make their predictions and whatnot. But boxing fans are united in the fact that we are hype for this fight. I got to do a separate video in terms of what I see in Errol Spence, videos on strategy and whatnot. But in the meantime, this was a statement victory. I think Errol Spence's biggest victory since his Kell Brook fight. And what a statement to make before the Terrence Crawford fight. That he's the bigger draw. He brought out 40,000 fans to AT&T Dallas Cowboys Stadium. So Errol Spence is clearly a draw. His last few pay-per-views all did over 300,000 buys. I think this one might even do over 500,000 pay-per-view buys. And past that, and crazy thing too is if this joint did 500,000 pay-per-view buys, they were $75 a pop. So that would be, if it did 1 million, that would be 75 million. Cut that in half. That's about $37 million that this fight generated just from pay-per-view buys. That doesn't include the live gate, aka the ticket sales from the arena, and all the other things, all the other money that, you know, the fighters are able to earn on the back end. But this is, I mean, he's great for business. He being Errol Spence Jr. Clearly he's what he calls himself, the big fish. That's his way of saying like, yo, I'm the draw. And so when I fight Terrence Crawford, right, Spence is saying that he's good, right? He's going to want the larger piece of the pie. I don't think it's unrealistic for Errol to tell Crawford like, yo, this is going to be a 70-30 fight. Some people are saying 60-40. I think that's more than fair. I think when you look at the draw, when you look at the pay-per-view buys, no matter who Spence is fighting, he's selling tickets. He's selling a fight. He right now is the bigger draw. He has 3 belts. He took all the belts from the champion holding him. He is the bigger pay-per-view draw. He's the bigger in-person live gate draw. And he has the better resume in the welterweight division. And so I think it's no longer really a conversation of who is the bigger draw. At this point, is a question of, you know, numerically and financially, how do you quantify that in the contract? You know, what percentage of the pie do you give to Terrence Crawford? I think 70-30 is fair. I think 65-35 is very fair. That would actually be the number I wouldn't be surprised if they land on. But it's not going to be no 50-50. But we're so excited for this fight. Both fighters have been talking a crazy amount of trash on social media. And it just lets us know that they're fighting next. So we're looking forward to it.